1227, Genghis Khan is dying. Before the end, he names Jedi as his successor and divides command of the empire among his sons, a structure built to outlast any single man's death. Most people call this succession, a king simply choosing an heir. But that is a coping mechanism, a comforting word for what was actually architecture. A story that lets men admire the outcome without confronting the design behind it. Empire was never a conquest. It was a machine, engineered to outlast its builder, engineered to compound rather than spend, engineered to survive the very man who built it. Today, we take that machine apart. This is century thinking, the law that a builder plans for a horizon he will never personally see. Rome's engineers laid aqueducts and roads, not for the emperor's lifetime, but for centuries of use their designers would never witness. They calculated gradients and load, bearing arches for infrastructure that would outlive not just them, but their grandchildren. The internal conviction that outcomes belong to the builder's decisions, not to fate, extended so far forward that death itself becomes just another variable to plan around. Most men operate with a locus of control that stretches, at best, to the end of the month. The builder stretches his past his own funeral. The mechanism is simple. Before any decision this week, ask whether it still holds value in 50 years. If the answer is no, it is a distraction wearing the costume of progress. Urgent, loud, and ultimately forgettable. Run every major decision through that filter for 7 days and watch how many of your current priorities fail the test. The average man plans his next paycheck. The architect plans his descendants' inheritance. But a mind fixed on the horizon is still just a mind. Which brings us to the second law. This is the compounding realm. The principle that empires grow not through single victories, but through returns that stack on themselves. The Mongol expansion under Genghis Khan did not function as a series of isolated conquests. Each absorbed territory added logistics, intelligence networks, and manpower that made the next conquest faster and cheaper than the last. A campaign in one region funded the campaign in the next. Captured administrators became the officials who ran newly conquered provinces. Nothing was spent and discarded. Everything was reinvested. This is compounding, the mathematical reality that small, repeated gains multiply rather than add, turning modest advantages into overwhelming ones given enough cycles. A 1% daily advantage, repeated for a year, does not produce a 1% gain. It produces a multiple. The mechanism: audit your week for one asset that grows on its own, a skill, a relationship, a system, and feed it before you feed anything that only pays once. A single sale pays once. A single sale pays once. A referral network pays for years. The average man chases wins. The strategist chases returns that chase themselves. But returns mean nothing without a structure built to receive them, which brings us to the third law. This is institutional muscle. The doctrine that systems outperform heroes, because heroes die and systems do not. Rome's legions ran on standardized command, standardized training, standardized replacement, a structure so resilient it survived the assassination of Caesar and the deaths of a dozen emperors after him without the empire itself collapsing. A legion that lost its commander did not dissolve. It promoted from within, using a command structure built for exactly that failure. The philosophy underneath this is Nietzsche's will to power, not as domination over others, but as the drive to impose lasting form on chaos. Building a structure that outlives the will that created it is the highest expression of that drive. It requires the builder to accept his own eventual irrelevance to the thing he built. The mechanism: write down the one task only you currently know how to do. This week, spend 1 hour training a replacement or building a checklist that makes you unnecessary to it. Do this again next week with a different task. The average man makes himself indispensable, mistaking dependency for value. The emperor makes himself irrelevant to the machine's survival, understanding that irrelevance is the final proof the machine works. But a machine built to survive its founder can still be killed by its own momentum, which brings us to the fourth law. This is the expansion trap, the law that unchecked growth eventually turns the empire's own scale into its greatest liability. Standard Oil did not fall to a rival company. It fell because its dominance became so total that it triggered the antitrust action that broke it apart in 1911. Its size, once its greatest weapon, became the exact evidence used to dismantle it. The mathematics here is the Pareto principle inverted. Beyond a certain point, each additional unit of expansion returns less value while attracting proportionally more resistance, regulation, and internal rot. The first territory conquered is pure gain. The 50th territory conquered may cost more to hold than it produces. The mechanism, before saying yes to the next expansion, the next hire, the next market, the next commitment, names specifically what it costs in attention, not just in money. Attention is the only resource that cannot be recovered once spent. Refuse the expansion if the cost exceeds the gain, even when the opportunity looks impressive on paper. The average man mistakes more for better. The predator knows exactly when to stop eating, because a predator that eats past capacity becomes slow, and slow things get replaced. But even a builder who masters growth and restraint eventually faces the one test he cannot personally pass, which brings us to the fifth law. This is succession architecture, the final law, the one that separates a builder from an empire. Does the structure survive without him? The Medici banking dynasty, once the financial power behind Europe, decayed across generations, not from external conquest, but from succession failure. Heirs who inherited wealth without inheriting the discipline that built it. They received the machine without receiving the manual. Genghis Khan, by contrast, spent his final years explicitly dividing command and doctrine among his sons before his death, ensuring the Mongol system would outlive the man. He did not simply name an heir. He distributed the actual mechanics of command, so that no single death could collapse the whole structure. This is memento mori in its most practical form, not a meditation on death, but a discipline that forces every decision to be built for a world the builder will not be alive to see. The mechanism: identify one person you are currently training to replace you, and give them one real decision this month. Not a task, a decision. A task tests obedience. A decision tests judgment. And judgment is the only thing worth passing on. The average man builds a monument to himself, something that requires his name to matter. The architect builds a machine that forgets his name and keeps running, because the machine's survival was always the actual point. Drop the fantasy that the empire ends when you do. Define the horizon at 50 years, not 50 weeks. Adopt the discipline of compounding over the thrill of winning. Build the system before you build the legacy. Start training your own replacement today, not on your deathbed. Refuse the next expansion the moment its cost outweighs its return. Refusal is not weakness, it is architecture. The empire was never the man,